I never imagined the folks who brought me into this world would try and bury me alive, but standing in that chilly, wood-panelled office, I saw I'd been a ghost in my own home for 30 years. Oh, and before I go on, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop it in the comments, won't you? And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It's free. And honestly, it really does help us keep making more of these stories for you. All right. Now, where were we? My name's Julia, and for as long as I can recall, I was the family placeholder, that invisible girl filling gaps between Lyanna's trophies and my parents' social climbing. My father, Richard, was a hedge fund manager who saw worth only in stock options and quarterly returns. My mother, Patricia, curated our lives like a museum gallery, every detail perfect for the outside world to admire. They looked right through me like a pane of glass, like I wasn't even there. Lyanna was the sun they orbited around, the golden child whose every sneeze was treated like a symphony. Harvard MBA at 25, corner office at a Fortune 500 company by 30, engaged to a neurosurgeon whose family had old money. She could do no wrong in their eyes. Me? I just kept the house quiet so she could study, faded into the wallpaper while they cheered her latest promotion, her latest award, her latest achievement. I was the daughter they introduced with a vague wave and a quick subject change. Oh, and this is Julia. She's around. I went to community college while Lyanna went to Harvard. I worked as a librarian while she climbed corporate ladders. I lived in the basement apartment of their mansion while she got the penthouse in the city that Daddy bought her. And through it all, I told myself I was okay with it, that I'd found peace in my quiet life, that I didn't need their approval. But that was a lie I told myself to survive. The only one who truly saw me was my grandfather, Walter. He was a man of deep silences and sharp eyes, a research scientist who'd built a medical research foundation from absolutely nothing. Started in a garage in 1962 with borrowed equipment and a dream to cure diseases that pharmaceutical companies ignored because they weren't profitable enough. By the time I was born, the Walter Chen Foundation was worth hundreds of millions and had contributed to treatments for 3 rare genetic disorders. We spent summers at his lake house upstate, where he didn't teach me to win like he tried with Lyanna. He taught me to watch, to observe, to see what others missed. I remember one particular afternoon when I was 12. He handed me a carved fishing rod, the one his own father had made, and told me to feel the pull under the water. Those hidden currents most people are too loud to notice, he said. The fish aren't stupid, Julia. They know when someone's thrashing around above them. But if you're patient, if you're quiet, they forget you're there. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and said something I've never forgotten. Being quiet isn't a weakness, Julia. It's a superpower. Because when people think you're invisible, they stop hiding who they really are. They show you the truth. At the time, I thought he was just talking about fishing. He taught me other things too. How to read financial statements, because he said everyone should understand money. How to spot inconsistencies in documents, because details matter. How to use technology to find information, to verify facts, to dig deeper than the surface. He treated me like I was smart, like I was capable, like I mattered. Lyanna found these lessons boring. She was too busy networking, building her brand, making connections. She'd show up at the lake house for a few hours, take some photos for Instagram, then leave. But I stayed. I absorbed everything Walter taught me. When Walter passed away 3 years ago at 89, the grief felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. He'd been sick for 2 years, declining slowly, and I'd visited him every single day in that final year, read to him, sat with him, held his hand when the pain got bad. But for my parents and Lyanna, his death was just an opening act for a payday. I remember the funeral. I was crying, genuinely devastated, while they spent the reception in the corner discussing renovations to the estate and how they'd split the assets. I heard my mother saying she'd always wanted to turn Walter's study into a yoga studio. My father was already on the phone with a realtor about selling the lake house. Lyanna was calculating how much her trust fund would be. pulling up compound interest calculators on her phone during the eulogy. At the will reading 2 weeks later, the air in that wood-panelled office was thick with their barely concealed greed. They wore black, of course, the picture of mourning, but their eyes were bright with anticipation. Mr. Boone, Walter's lawyer and oldest friend, sat behind that massive oak desk with a face like stone. He'd known Walter for 40 years, helped him build the foundation from nothing, and I could see the disgust in his eyes as he looked at my family. He read the distributions, and it was exactly what they expected. To my granddaughter Lyanna Chen, the penthouse apartment in Manhattan, valued at $4.2 million, and a trust fund of $10 million. My mother actually clapped. Lyanna smiled like she'd won an award. To my son Richard Chen and daughter-in-law Patricia Chen, the family estate in Connecticut, valued at $8.5 million, and the investment portfolios totaling approximately $15 million. My father nodded, satisfied. My mother was already planning the renovations out loud. Then Mr. Boone paused. He looked directly at me, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Sympathy? Anticipation? For my granddaughter, Julia Chen, he said slowly. Walter left a single dollar, bill, and a sealed envelope. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed off those wood panels. Well, she said, smoothing her silk Chanel skirt with perfectly manicured nails. I suppose Walter finally realized Julia hasn't earned a seat at the table. He was a brilliant man, after all. My father chuckled, shaking his head. Tough love, he said. Maybe this will finally motivate you to make something of yourself, Julia. Lyanna didn't even look up from her phone. She was already checking her new account balances, calculating, planning. The invisible sister wasn't worth her attention. Go earn your own way now, dear, my mother continued, her voice dripping with condescension. Just like we've been telling you for years. Maybe get a better job than that little library position. It's embarrassing, honestly. I sat there, holding that dollar bill and that envelope, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. That stinging, familiar shame that had followed me my entire life. The feeling of being less than, of being insufficient, of being a disappointment. But then I felt the weight of that envelope, heavier than it should be, and something in Walter's training kicked in. Details matter, Julia. Always look deeper. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I just stood up, thanked Mr. Boone, and walked out of that office while they continued celebrating their windfall. I drove directly to a small inn on the edge of town, a place called the River's Rest that Walter and I used to stop at after our fishing trips. I checked in, went to my room, and locked the door behind me. Then, and only then, did I let myself look at what Walter had left me. The dollar bill looked old, worn, like it had been handled many times. But when I held it up to the light, I saw something. Tiny numbers written in Walter's precise handwriting, so small you'd miss them unless you were really looking. Coordinates. Not GPS coordinates, but ledger coordinates. A date and an entry number in what I recognized as the Foundation's old filing system. The envelope contained a brass key, old and tarnished, and a note in Walter's handwriting. Start where the truth was first bent. The quiet ones see everything. Make them regret underestimating you. I sat in that room and I cried. Not from shame this time, but from understanding. Walter hadn't abandoned me. He'd trained me my entire life for this moment. My parents thought I was a failure, invisible, forgettable. But they forgot that I spent my entire life observing them. I knew their patterns. I knew their habits. I knew their passwords, because they were too arrogant to think invisible Julia would ever use them. My father used the same password for everything. Lyanna 2000, the year she was born. My mother's laptop password was her maiden name and her wedding date. They'd said these things out loud, dozens of times, never thinking I was listening, never thinking I mattered enough to be a threat. Using the nature Walter had cultivated in me, the patience and observation skills he'd spent years teaching, I began to dig. I started with the coordinates on the dollar bill. They pointed to a ledger entry from 5 years ago, right when Walter's Alzheimer's diagnosis had first been whispered about in the family. I used my library access to search digital archives, cross-referenced with the Foundation's public filings, and found the first discrepancy. A transfer of $200,000, authorized by a signature that looked like Walter's, but was just slightly off. The pen pressure was wrong. Walter had arthritis. His signature had a distinctive shakiness. This one was too smooth. That's when I knew what I was looking at. For 5 years, while Walter's health had been failing, while I'd been sitting with him and reading to him and holding his hand, my parents hadn't been caring for him. They'd been stripping him, like vultures picking at a lion. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, diving deeper into the rabbit hole, used my father's passwords to access his email accounts, found correspondence with forgers, with offshore account managers, with lawyers who specialized in elder financial exploitation. They'd forged Walter's signature on dozens of documents, moved assets from the Foundation into private accounts, drained nearly $20 million over 5 years, slowly enough that it wouldn't trigger immediate red flags, but fast enough to accumulate a fortune. And the worst part? They'd been laughing about it. I found emails between my parents and Lyanna, casual conversations about how easy it was to fool the old man, how Julia was too stupid to notice, how they were setting themselves up for life while I played babysitter. One email from my mother to Lyanna made me physically sick. "Your grandfather is finally good for something," she wrote, "and Julia's so busy being the devoted granddaughter that she hasn't noticed we're cleaning him out. She's always been useless, but at least she's a good distraction." I sat there in that inn room, staring at these emails on my laptop screen, and something fundamental shifted inside me. The girl who'd accepted being invisible, who'd made herself small to keep the peace, who'd told herself she was okay with crumbs while they feasted, that girl died right there. The woman Walter had been training, the one who saw everything and forgot nothing, she took her place. But I needed more. I needed proof that would stand up in court, not just emails and financial records that a good lawyer could explain away. That's when I remembered the key. I drove to the lake house that night, arriving around midnight. The place was dark, empty, already listed for sale by my father. I let myself in with the spare key I'd always had, the one they'd forgotten I possessed, because I was forgettable Julia who didn't matter. The lake house felt haunted without Walter. His reading glasses were still on the side table. His favourite cardigan hung on the chair. The air smelled like pipe tobacco and old books, like him. I went to his study, the room where he'd taught me to read financial statements and think critically. Under his desk was a section of floor that had always been slightly loose. He used to joke that every scientist needed a secret hiding place. Using the brass key, I pried up that floorboard. Inside wasn't just money, though there was some. 20,000 in cash, enough to keep me going while I worked. But more importantly, there was an archive, binders full of documents, bank statements going back 7 years, digital recordings on old thumb drives, a leather journal filled with Walter's observations. I sat on that floor, and I listened to my parents' voices on those recordings. Walter had been recording them, had known what they were doing, had documented everything. The cold, calculating voices of people who saw their own father as an obstacle to overcome, a resource to exploit. I heard them discussing which accounts to drain next. I heard my father coaching my mother on how to forge Walter's signature more convincingly. I heard Lyanna offering tax avoidance strategies. And I heard them talking about me, laughing about how pathetic I was, how convenient it was that I was so devoted to Walter because it meant I kept him calm and compliant, how I was too stupid to ever figure out what they were doing. My father's voice on one recording, "Julia's like a faithful dog, keeps the old man happy while we do what needs to be done. At least she's good for something." I listened to every recording, read every document, absorbed every piece of evidence, and with each revelation, my resolve hardened like steel. There was a note from Walter in that journal, dated just 2 weeks before he died. "Julia, if you're reading this, It means I'm gone, and they've shown their true colors. I've known about the theft for years, caught on early, around the second forged signature. But I needed them to keep going, to build a case so airtight they couldn't talk their way out of it. I couldn't protect you from their cruelty growing up. That's my greatest regret. But I can give you the tools to protect yourself now. You're smarter than all of them combined, and they've never seen it because they've never really looked at you. The foundation is yours. It always has been. Held in a private trust they don't know exists. The public will was theatre, giving them enough rope to hang themselves with. Make them pay, sweetheart. Not with violence, but with the truth. Show them what the invisible girl really sees. I cried reading that. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of purpose. I spent the next 3 weeks working in secret with Mr. Boone. He'd been waiting for me to find everything, had known about Walter's plan from the beginning. Together, we built a case that was absolutely ironclad. While I prepared, my parents were spending money they didn't actually have yet. My father bought a yacht. My mother was planning a 6-month European tour. Lyanna had put a down payment on a vacation home in the Hamptons. They called me once during those weeks, my mother's voice saccharine sweet. "Julia, dear, we need you to move your boxes out of the basement. We're converting it into a private gym for Lyanna. She needs space for her Peloton and her weights. You understand." I told them I'd be happy to come get my things, that maybe we should all meet at the lake house one last time, have a family gathering to honor Walter's memory properly. They agreed immediately, thinking I was finally accepting my place, maybe even planning to beg them for a handout to help me move. The day they arrived, pulling up in my father's new Tesla and my mother's Range Rover, they looked like they were going to a photo shoot. Designer clothes, expensive watches, the picture of success built on stolen money. Lyanna complained about the humidity the second she stepped out of her car. "Can we make this quick?" she said. "I have a spa appointment at 4. "Let's get this over with, Julia," my father said, checking his Rolex. "We have a reservation at Le Bernardin tonight. 7 o'clock. Very hard to get." Mr. Boone stepped out of the lake house then, laptop in hand. My mother's face went confused. "What's Boone doing here?" "There's been an adjustment to the estate," he said calmly, setting up his laptop on the porch table. My mother scoffed, her voice sharp. "The will is final, Boone. We've already started transferring assets. That's the problem," he said, and pressed play on a video file. Walter's face filled the screen. It was a recording he'd made 6 months before he died, when he was still lucid, still sharp. "I know what you've been doing." His voice rang out clear and strong. "I've watched you steal from me. I've watched you forge my signature. I've watched you treat the only person in this family with any integrity like she was nothing, like she was invisible." My parents' faces went ghostly pale. Lyanna's phone slipped from her hand. The video continued. Walter detailed every theft, every forged document, every lie. Then Mr. Boone switched to audio recordings. My parents' own voices filled the air, discussing their fraud, laughing about fooling the old man, mocking me. My mother tried to speak, but no sound came out. Then came the real blow. Mr. Boone pulled out a document. "Walter included a clause in his will that you clearly didn't read carefully," he said. "Any evidence of fraud or financial exploitation would trigger immediate forfeiture of all inheritance. Everything you received is now void." My father found his voice. That's not legally binding. We'll fight this. Fight it with what money?" I spoke for the first time, stepping forward. "You've already spent millions you don't have. The yacht is financed. The European tour is on credit. Lyanna's Hamptons house deposit is in escrow. But here's the thing you never knew," I continued, pulling out another document. "The Research Foundation was never part of the public will. It was established in a private trust 40 years ago, and the beneficiary, the sole owner and director, is me. It always has been." I held up the documentation. Walter had set it up when I was born, a gift for the quiet granddaughter he knew they'd overlook. "The foundation is worth $340 million, I said, watching their faces. "The accounts you drained? That was Walter's personal money. Yes, but the foundation was untouchable, and you never even knew it existed. You keep the houses, I said, my voice calm as the lake behind us, at least until the banks foreclose when you can't make the payments. But the foundation is mine. The accounts you drained will be repaid, every cent, or I hand all of this evidence to the prosecutors. You will retire quietly, stay out of my sight, and never contact me again. Mr. Boone handed my mother an official notice. Criminal fraud charges, he said. Federal, because you moved money across state lines. We can make this go away if you cooperate, or Julia can destroy you publicly. My mother tried to scream, but the sound died in her throat when she saw the documents, the proof, the recordings, everything. They'd built a house of cards, and I'd just pulled out the bottom one. Lyanna looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Fear. The golden child was afraid of invisible Julia. But I didn't need her fear. I didn't need their apologies or their explanations. I just needed them gone. I watched them drive away in their expensive cars that they couldn't actually afford, leaving me standing in front of Walter's lake house. The silence that followed felt different than all the silences before. This time, it wasn't the silence of being overlooked or ignored. It was the silence of peace, of justice, of truth, finally, breaking through. I stayed at the lake house for a week after that, going through Walter's things properly, saying goodbye to him in my own way. I found more notes he'd left for me, hidden in books he knew I'd read, tucked into fishing equipment he knew I'd use. One note simply said, "The invisible ones are the most dangerous, because everyone forgets we're watching. Never forget your power." I sold the lake house eventually, but not to strangers. I turned it into a retreat center for the foundation, a place where researchers could come to think and work in peace. Walter would have loved that. The foundation, it's thriving. We've expanded into 4 new research areas, funded treatments that Big Pharma won't touch because they're not profitable enough. We've helped thousands of people with rare diseases that the world wanted to forget about, just like they wanted to forget about me. My parents? They had to sell everything to repay what they stole. The mansion, the cars, the yacht. Last I heard, they're living in a modest condo in Florida, fighting with each other constantly. Lyanna lost her job when the scandal hit. Turns out companies don't love hiring people connected to elder fraud. She's working in middle management somewhere, her golden child shine thoroughly tarnished. Me? I run a $340 million foundation from my office at the old lake house property. I still work at the library 2 days a week because I love it, not because I need to. And I'm not invisible anymore. Not because I changed, but because I stopped accepting other people's definitions of who I should be. Walter taught me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, that watching doesn't mean accepting, that the invisible ones see everything, and when we choose to step into the light, we can change the world. If you liked this story, please hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, and if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been overlooked, remember this: they're not seeing clearly, but you are, and that's your superpower. To hear the next story, click the box on the screen. Thanks for listening, and remember, the quiet ones are always watching.